The buzzing was undeniable, a furious, insistent hum that grew louder with each passing second. Karen, our HOA president, shrieked, a sound like a rusty gate scraping open, and dropped the large cardboard box. It hit her manicured lawn with a thud, and instantly, a torrent of angry, striped insects erupted from the crumpled packaging. Hornets. A whole lot of them, swirling in a menacing cloud, zeroing in on the brightly colored scarf she had draped around her neck. Her face, usually pinched and stern, contorted into a mask of pure terror as she flailed wildly, trying to swat them away. It was a beautiful, chaotic mess, and frankly, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction bubbling up inside me. How did a box of hornets end up on Karen's doorstep, and why did I, a seemingly quiet homeowner, feel such a thrill watching her frantic dance? Life in our suburban neighborhood used to be a lot simpler. Before Karen took over the Homeowners Association, there was a feeling of easygoing camaraderie. Kids rode bikes freely, neighbors shared backyard barbecues, and the occasional untrimmed bush was just, well, an untrimmed bush. My name is Alex, and I moved into this community with my golden retriever, Sunny, about 2 years ago. I loved the quiet streets, the mature trees, and the sense of peace it offered. I'm a software developer, so I spend a lot of time indoors, but I always looked forward to my evening walks with Sunny, chatting with neighbors, and enjoying the fresh air. I tried to be a good neighbor, always waved, offered a helping hand when I saw someone struggling with groceries, and generally kept to myself. I believed in live and let live, and that kindness, even in small gestures, could make a big difference. Then Karen arrived. She wasn't new to the neighborhood, but she'd always been a bit of a background character, a woman who meticulously maintained her rose garden and occasionally tooted about stray leaves on her sidewalk. When the previous HOA president moved away, Karen seized the opportunity, promising order and aesthetic improvement to the community. At first, people thought it sounded good. Who doesn't want a nice-looking neighborhood? But her idea of order was more like absolute control. Rules started popping up faster than weeds in a neglected garden. No gnomes in front yards. No political signs of any kind. Lawns had to be cut to an exact height, measured, I swear, with a ruler. Trash cans couldn't be visible from the street before 6 a.m. on collection day. It felt like every week a new, increasingly specific dictate would arrive in our mailboxes, usually with a passive-aggressive note about maintaining property values and community standards. People started grumbling, but most just sighed and complied. It seemed easier than dealing with Karen's relentless pursuit of perfection. I remember one particularly sunny afternoon, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, was struggling to bring in her recycling bin. It was a big, unwieldy thing, and she was moving slowly. I walked over to help her, pulling the bin up her driveway. As I did, Karen's pristine white SUV pulled up alongside us. Her window rolled down, and her eyes, usually narrowed, seemed to widen as she took in the scene. "Alex, isn't that sweet?" she said, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that always made my teeth hurt. "However, Mrs. Henderson, your recycling bin was out for an additional 17 minutes past the designated retrieval time. That's a violation. And Alex, while your intentions are good, loitering by a neighbor's property, even to assist, can be misinterpreted. We need to maintain a certain level of decorum." Mrs. Henderson, a sweet woman who baked the best apple pie, looked utterly defeated. I felt a surge of frustration, but I just smiled tightly and said, "Just helping a neighbor, Karen. No harm done." Karen just gave a tight-lipped smile and drove off, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. It was a small moment, but it was one of many that started to chip away at the good feeling of living here. Things escalated gradually. Fines started appearing for minor infractions. A misplaced garden hose, a recycling bin left out too long, a single dandelion peeking through someone's perfect lawn. It became a game to Karen, a way to exert her authority, and it made everyone walk on eggshells. The once friendly neighborhood began to feel tense, people avoiding eye contact, hesitant to even leave their homes for fear of breaking some unspoken rule. My direct encounters with Karen were minimal at first, mostly just polite nods. I kept my lawn neat, my hedges trimmed, and followed all the rules. I didn't want any trouble. But then came the package. It was a special order, a limited edition collectible action figure I'd pre-ordered months ago. It cost a pretty penny, around $300, and I'd been eagerly awaiting its arrival. The tracking said it was delivered. The notification popped up on my phone, delivered to front porch. I rushed out, but there was nothing. Just an empty stoop. I checked my security camera footage, and there it was. A delivery truck, a package placed carefully on my porch, and then, a few minutes later, Karen's figure, unmistakable with her signature brightly colored scarf and oversized sunglasses, approaching my house. She bent down, picked up the package, and walked away, disappearing into her own house across the street. My blood ran cold. She had stolen my package. The audacity, the sheer nerve of it, was astounding. This wasn't just a misplaced bin, this was theft. My anger simmered, a slow burn that quickly turned into a raging inferno. I knew I couldn't just let this go. And that's when the idea, a truly terrible and brilliant idea, began to form in my mind. The image of Karen walking off with my package replayed in my mind like a broken record, each loop fueling my outrage. My initial thought was to confront her directly, to march across the street and demand my action figure back. But then, I pictured her smug face, her dismissive wave, and I knew a direct confrontation would only end in frustration and likely another one of her infuriating violation notices. Karen thrived on control, and she would undoubtedly twist the situation to make me seem like the aggressor. I needed a different approach, something that would hit her where it hurt, something she wouldn't see coming. My mind raced, bouncing between childish pranks and elaborate schemes. A part of me, the part that believed in reason and community, urged me to simply report her to the HOA board. But then I remembered, she was the HOA board, effectively. She had stacked it with people who rarely challenged her, mostly out of fear or apathy. This was going to be a solo mission. I spent the rest of that evening in a state of agitated contemplation. Sonny, sensing my distress, kept nudging my hand with his wet nose, offering silent comfort. I found myself pacing my living room, the security footage paused on my TV, Karen's figure frozen in the act of petty larceny. How could someone be so brazen? The sheer arrogance of it gnawed at me. This wasn't just about the $300 action figure, it was about the principle, about her continuous abuse of power, about the little acts of meanness that chipped away at the neighborhood spirit. The next morning, I tried to calm down. I made myself a strong cup of coffee and sat on my porch, watching the quiet street. Mrs. Henderson was tending to her roses, her movements slow but deliberate. Across the street, Karen's house looked as pristine and unapproachable as ever, her lawn an unnatural shade of emerald green. I thought about the kindness Mrs. Henderson had shown me, the times she'd offered me fresh-baked cookies, or simply a warm smile and a friendly chat. Her quiet resilience in the face of Karen's nitpicking was inspiring. It reminded me that even in a place where one person tried to cast a long shadow, genuine human connection still existed. I didn't want to become like Karen, consumed by bitterness. But I also knew I couldn't let her get away with this. My revenge, if I was to have it, needed to be precise, memorable, and above all, utterly Karen-proof. The idea of the Hornets had truly begun as a fleeting, wild thought, born from a frustrated imagination. At first, it was just a silly fantasy, a way to blow off steam. But the more I thought about it, the more it began to take shape. Hornets weren't dangerous if handled correctly. They were a symbol of disruption, of an unexpected, uncontrollable force. And Karen, with her obsession with control and order, would be utterly thrown by something so chaotic. It was perfect. It wasn't violent, it wasn't destructive to property, but it was incredibly inconvenient and, perhaps, a little humiliating. And that, I realized, was exactly what I was aiming for. My research began, not on how to get hornets, but on how to handle them safely. I certainly didn't want to hurt the creatures or, more importantly, get stung myself. I learned about their life cycle, their habits, and surprisingly, how to temporarily calm them. It was fascinating, in a bizarre sort of way. I spent hours online, watching videos, reading articles, learning everything I could. I discovered that a professional pest control supply store, the kind that caters to beekeepers and pest removal experts, would likely have what I needed. This wasn't going to be some random act of backyard mischief, this was going to be a carefully orchestrated operation. My first step was to acquire a suitable container. It needed to be sturdy, breathable, but also escape-proof until the moment of truth. I found exactly what I was looking for at a specialized shipping supply store, a reinforced cardboard box designed for live animal transport, complete with ventilation holes and a secure lid. It was discreet, unassuming, and looked like any other package. This was key. Karen would be expecting something, perhaps, a return to sender, or another one of my numerous online deliveries. She wouldn't suspect a thing. The next challenge was the hornets themselves. I considered trying to find a wild nest, but that seemed far too risky and potentially harmful to both me and the hornets. Then I stumbled upon a local apiary that also offered nuisance insect removal services. They sometimes relocated hornet nests, and I wondered if they might be willing to donate a small, contained group for a scientific experiment. I called them, concocting a vague story about a school project on insect behavior and the need for a contained environment for observation. The man on the phone, a gruff but seemingly good-natured fellow named Hank, sounded skeptical but eventually agreed to let me pick up a small, inactive hornet's nest that he had recently removed. He warned me about safety and gave me a few tips on handling, which I gratefully absorbed. The day I went to pick up the nest, a strange mix of nerves and excitement bubbled within me. Hank handed me a mesh bag containing a small, remarkably intact nest, explaining that the hornets inside were mostly dormant due to a mild sedative he'd used for the removal. "They'll wake up when it wears off," he cautioned, "and they'll be mighty cranky. Be careful, son." I thanked him profusely, my heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. This was actually happening. I had my weapon. Back home, I carefully transferred the nest into my specially prepared box. I added a small piece of fruit, as Hank suggested, to keep them minimally nourished until their grand debut. I sealed the box tightly, triple-checking the latches. It looked like an ordinary package, perhaps a bit on the light side for its size, but otherwise unremarkable. The waiting began. I kept the box in a cool, dark place, away from Sonny's curious nose. Every so often, I'd hear a faint rustling from within, a subtle reminder of the ticking time bomb I held. The plan was almost complete. All that remained was the delivery. And then, the neighborhood, and particularly Karen, would discover what happens when you steal from Alex. The day of the delivery dawned, bright and clear, but my stomach churned with a mixture of apprehension and grim determination. I had chosen a time when Karen was usually out, at one of her notoriously long HOA meetings, or perhaps at her weekly bridge game. This was crucial, I didn't want to be seen. The hornets, I hoped, were beginning to stir, their sedative wearing off. I imagined them, slowly stretching their tiny legs, their antennae twitching, ready to emerge from their temporary slumber with a vengeance. The thought made a wicked grin spread across my face. I waited until I saw her white SUV pull out of her driveway, then I grabbed the package. It was light, almost too light for its size, but inside, I knew, was a buzzing, angry surprise. My heart thumped a nervous rhythm against my ribs as I walked across the street, trying to look as casual as possible, as if I were merely retrieving my mail or checking on a loose sprinkler head. "Sonny, thankfully, was still inside, oblivious to my clandestine mission. I approached Karen's front porch, a pristine expanse of concrete that probably got power washed weekly. Her door was a dark, imposing wood, with a shiny brass knocker. It felt like I was approaching a fortress. With a swift, practiced motion, I placed the box squarely in the center of her welcome mat, right where a typical delivery would land. I made sure the address label, which I had carefully printed with my own address, was clearly visible. This was important. When she eventually saw the box, she would immediately recognize it as something meant for me. It was a subtle detail, but one that would add to her eventual confusion and frustration. I then quickly retreated, walking back to my house with a forced nonchalance, my ears straining for any sound, any indication that I had been spotted. The street remained quiet, bathed in the morning sun. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Phase 1, complete. Now came the agonizing wait. I positioned myself by my living room window, just out of sight, peeking through the blinds like a spy. Every car that drove by made me jump. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Time stretched, slow and thick, each minute feeling like an hour. I imagined Karen returning, her sharp eyes scanning her porch, her hand reaching for the seemingly innocent package. Would she open it inside? Or would her usual meticulousness prompt her to examine it right there on the porch? I hoped for the latter. The thought of a swarm of hornets let loose inside her perfectly organized home was tempting, but I wanted the immediate, public spectacle, a visual representation of her carefully constructed order being thrown into utter chaos. About an hour later, Karen's white SUV reappeared. My pulse quickened. She pulled into her driveway, parked with her usual precision, and then, with her brightly colored scarf draped perfectly around her neck, she emerged. She carried a large, designer handbag, and her expression was, as always, one of mild disdain for the world around her. She walked with a stiff, almost regal posture up her pathway. My eyes were glued to her as she reached the porch. She paused, her gaze falling upon the box. She seemed to hesitate for a moment, her head tilted slightly, as if trying to decipher why a package addressed to me was on her porch. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, probably formulating some new HOA rule about misdirected mail or trespassing packages. Then, with a sigh that I imagined was filled with long-suffering impatience, she bent down. My breath hitched. This was it. She picked up the box, turning it over in her hands, no doubt scrutinizing the label. And then, she made her fatal mistake. With a decisive tug, she started to open the flap. That's when the buzzing started. It was low at first, a faint, angry thrumming, growing rapidly louder. Karen's eyes widened, a flicker of confusion crossing her face before it morphed into pure, unadulterated fear. She screamed, a high-pitched, piercing sound that made Sonny, inside, let out a startled bark. The box slipped from her grasp, tumbling to the ground. A dark, furious cloud of hornets erupted from within, a swirling, buzzing vortex of striped fury. They had awoken, and they were, indeed, mighty cranky. Karen shrieked again, a more desperate, terrified sound this time. She started flailing, trying to bat away the angry insects that were now swarming around her head. Her bright scarf, usually a symbol of her carefully curated image, became a target, attracting the hornets like a beacon. She stumbled backward, tripping over her own perfectly placed welcome mat, and landed with an undignified thump on her meticulously manicured lawn. The hornets, relentless, continued their assault, circling her head, dive-bombing her hair. It was a scene of pure pandemonium, and I watched, transfixed, a grim satisfaction spreading through me. The chaos I had so carefully planned was now in full, glorious motion. What would she do now? And more importantly, how long until someone else noticed the spectacle unfolding on Karen's perfect lawn? Karen's screams continued, a frantic, desperate sound that cut through the usual quiet of the neighborhood. She thrashed on the grass, a tangle of limbs and a brightly colored scarf, as the hornets buzzed relentlessly around her. It was a bizarre, almost unbelievable sight, like something out of a cartoon, yet terrifyingly real. My initial satisfaction quickly morphed into a strange mix of disbelief and a fleeting pang of something akin to pity. Just a fleeting pang, mind you. She had stolen my $300 package, after all. Then, a car pulled up down the street. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, heading home from her morning errands. She slowed her vehicle, her head tilting as she squinted at the commotion on Karen's lawn. Her eyes widened, and I saw her mouth drop open. Quickly, she pulled her phone from her purse, obviously dialing. It wouldn't be long before the whole neighborhood, or at least the emergency services, knew about Karen's current predicament. My mission was successful, though now the aftermath would begin. Karen, meanwhile, had managed to scramble to her feet, abandoning all pretense of dignity. She stumbled towards her front door, swatting frantically at the lingering hornets, her shrieks now punctuated by choked sobs. She fumbled with the doorknob, finally yanking it open and practically falling inside, slamming the door shut behind her with a resounding thud. The angry buzzing from the remaining hornets, now circling the spot where she had fallen, gradually began to dissipate as they scattered, looking for new adventures or returning to their temporarily dislodged nest. A few minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced the suburban calm. A police car, followed by an ambulance, pulled up to Karen's house. Mrs. Rodriguez was already out of her car, speaking animatedly to the police officer who emerged from the patrol vehicle. I watched from my window, a quiet observer of the chaos I had orchestrated. Paramedics rushed to Karen's door, knocking loudly, and eventually, she opened it, her face swollen, blotchy, and tear-streaked. She looked like a complete mess, a far cry from her usual perfectly composed self. The paramedics gently led her to the ambulance, where they began to examine her. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I imagined her recounting the terrifying tale of the rogue hornets, while the police officer probably surveyed her pristine lawn, looking for any logical explanation. The incident caused quite a stir in the neighborhood. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see Karen? Hornets, they say. Some kind of freak accident." No one seemed to connect the dots to a stolen package, or to me. I had been careful. The box was addressed to me, and it had simply appeared on her porch. It implied a delivery error, not a calculated act of revenge. I allowed myself a small, quiet smirk. The element of surprise, combined with Karen's own self-importance, had played perfectly into my hands. She was too busy being the victim to consider that someone might have deliberately caused her misfortune. Life in the neighborhood took on a subtly different tone after the Hornet incident. Karen was rarely seen for a few days, presumably recovering from the stings and the humiliation. When she finally reappeared, she looked subdued. Her usual tight-lipped smile was gone, replaced by a more hesitant, almost wary expression. She still wore her scarves, but now I noticed she constantly seemed to be checking over her shoulder, a subtle twitch in her eye whenever a fly buzzed too close. The aura of invincibility she had carefully cultivated had been shattered. For a while, the excessive HOA rules seemed to ease up. The fines stopped appearing as frequently. People started leaving their recycling bins out a little longer, their garden gnomes re-emerged from storage, and a few rebellious political signs even popped up. A quiet rebellion, fueled by Karen's public humbling, was brewing. It was a pleasant change, a small breath of fresh air in a neighborhood that had felt suffocated for too long. Then, about a week later, a new letter arrived in my mailbox. It wasn't from the HOA this time. It was a single, stark white envelope with a simple, typed return address, Karen's house. My stomach gave a nervous lurch. Had she figured it out? Was this a threat? I carefully opened it, my heart pounding. Inside was a single sheet of paper, also typed, with no signature. The words were simple, yet chilling. I know you did this, Alex. You will regret it. My blood ran cold. She knew. Or at least, she suspected. The game, it seemed, was far from over. And now, it was about to get personal. The typed note, chilling in its simplicity, lay on my table. I know you did this, Alex. You will regret it. The words seemed to vibrate with Karen's cold fury. My earlier satisfaction evaporated, replaced by a knot of anxiety. So, she hadn't just suspected, she was certain. The casual assumption of a misplaced package was gone, replaced by a direct accusation. The thought of Karen, stewing in her perfect house, plotting her retaliation, sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just about a stolen package anymore, it was a full-blown war, and Karen was not one to back down. Sonny, sensing my unease, nudged my hand with his head, looking up at me with worried eyes. I ruffled his fur, trying to reassure myself as much as him. I tried to reason through her possible actions. Would she go to the police? Unlikely. She had no proof, only suspicion. The Hornet incident, from an official standpoint, was an accident. Would she try to get me fined by the HOA? That was more her style, but what for? Suspicion of Hornet-related mischief wasn't exactly in the bylaws. Unless she found a way to link it to some existing rule, however tenuous. This was Karen, after all. She excelled at twisting things. The next few days were a tense waiting game. I found myself constantly looking out my window, jumpy at every car that passed, every shadow that moved. I checked my security cameras obsessively, half expecting to see Karen's grim face peering into my windows. But there was nothing. An unnerving silence. This was almost worse than a direct confrontation. The suspense was eating at me, the not knowing what her regret it would entail. It made me realize that her power wasn't just in her official HOA position, but in the psychological game she played, the fear she instilled. I found some solace in my usual routine, taking Sonny for our evening walks. I noticed a slight shift in the neighborhood atmosphere. People were a little more willing to chat, to complain about the HOA, even. Mrs. Henderson, always kind, brought over a plate of her famous lemon bars, a silent gesture of solidarity. Things have been a bit calmer lately, haven't they? She said, a twinkle in her eye. I smiled, grateful for the small connection, a reminder that Karen didn't control everything, and that genuine community still existed beneath her suffocating rules. This small act of kindness, a simple offering of baked goods, felt like a quiet rebellion against the tension Karen had created. It was a reminder that people, at their core, yearned for connection and warmth, not endless rules and suspicion. Then, about a week after the letter, it began. Not a direct attack, but something far more insidious, something that hit at my carefully maintained quiet life. My internet started acting up. Not just slow, but intermittent, cutting out completely for hours at a time. As a software developer, a reliable internet connection was crucial for my work. I called my provider multiple times, but they insisted there were no issues on their end. They sent technicians, who checked everything, declared my connection optimal, and left me just as frustrated. Yet, the outages continued. It was incredibly disruptive, costing me precious work hours and making me increasingly agitated. Then, my mail started going missing. Important bills, bank statements, even a birthday card from my sister. It wasn't everything, just select pieces, enough to cause confusion and missed deadlines. I reported it to the post office, but they were equally baffled. Could be a new mail carrier, they suggested, or just random misdelivery. But I knew. This was too precise, too targeted. This was Karen. She was systematically chipping away at my sense of security, disrupting the very fabric of my daily life without leaving a single trace back to her. It was subtle, frustrating, and incredibly effective. The final straw came when I discovered a series of small, almost invisible scratches along the side of my car. Not deep gouges, but enough to be noticeable in the right light, enough to ruin the paintwork. It was parked in my own driveway, directly under my security camera, but the scratches appeared at night, when the light was poor, and the angle of the camera didn't quite catch anyone. It was clear, someone was deliberately messing with my property, trying to make my life miserable. It was a slow, creeping invasion, a constant reminder that Karen was out there, watching, waiting, and actively making good on her promise. The Hornets had been a loud, chaotic explosion. This was a silent, chilling siege. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the scratches on my car were just the beginning. I had humiliated her publicly, and now she was retaliating, quietly, relentlessly, and with a cold, calculating precision that was far more terrifying than any swarm of insects. I had to do something, and soon, before she dismantled my entire life, piece by infuriating piece. The scratches on my car were the final, infuriating straw. Karen's insidious campaign of subtle sabotage had escalated, chipping away at my peace of mind, and I knew I couldn't endure another moment of her silent torment. My internet outages made work a nightmare, the missing mail caused endless headaches, and now my car, a significant investment, was being deliberately damaged. This wasn't just about revenge for a stolen package anymore, it was about stopping a bully who threatened to dismantle my entire life. I had to end this, decisively and dramatically. My mind raced, considering all my options. Confrontation was still off the table. She would deny everything, and without concrete proof, it would just be my word against hers. The police couldn't help with phantom internet issues or mysterious mail. I needed a plan, something that would expose Karen's true nature to the entire neighborhood, something that would finally break her grip on power and force her to face the consequences of her actions. And it had to be undeniably linked to her, in a way that couldn't be dismissed as a mere accident. I spent the next few days working from a local coffee shop, trying to focus amidst the simmering rage. Sunny stayed home, probably wondering why I was so agitated. It was during one of these coffee shop sessions, staring blankly at my laptop screen, that an idea sparked, brilliant and audacious. The security camera footage. The one that clearly showed Karen taking my package. It was still on my computer, a silent witness to her petty crime. The problem was, it was my camera, on my property. Simply showing it to people wouldn't be enough for an official complaint, and Karen would undoubtedly spin it as a misunderstanding. But what if the neighborhood saw it? All of them. And what if it wasn't just the package? I started digging. I remembered Mrs. Henderson mentioning her missing garden gnome, a family heirloom. Mr. Davidson had complained about unusual charges on his credit card, after receiving a seemingly legitimate but unsolicited HOA survey in the mail that asked for financial details. Even Mrs. Rodriguez had grumbled about her award-winning prize-winning dahlias being mysteriously trampled one night, just after Karen had remarked they were too exuberant for the neighborhood's aesthetic. The more I looked, the more I found. Small, seemingly unrelated incidents, each one a minor annoyance, but all pointing to a pattern of petty vindictiveness. This wasn't just about me. Karen was a menace to the entire community. I decided to combine my evidence with theirs. It was time for a neighborhood intervention, but not a polite one. This needed to be public, undeniable, and impossible for Karen to ignore or deflect. I needed to broadcast her true nature to everyone. My plan began to solidify. I would create a presentation, a montage of all the subtle ways Karen had been undermining her neighbors, culminating in the irrefutable evidence of her theft. But how to present it? A neighborhood meeting would be too formal, too easy for her to control. It needed to be a surprise, a public unveiling that would catch her completely off guard. The annual neighborhood summer barbecue. It was just 2 weeks away, a tradition held in the common park area. Everyone would be there, including Karen, who always presided over the event with an air of self-importance. Perfect. I quietly reached out to a few trusted neighbors, subtly inquiring about their past, minor inconveniences. Mrs. Henderson readily agreed to let me use her gnome story. Mr. Davidson, initially hesitant, became furious when I pointed out the pattern with the HOA survey. Mrs. Rodriguez, fuming about her dahlias, was fully on board. I gathered their stories, carefully compiling them, cross-referencing dates and times, and where possible, looking for any corroborating details. Then came the grand finale, my security camera footage. I edited the clip of Karen stealing my package, slowing it down, highlighting her distinct scarf, the way she furtively looked around before snatching the box. I also included footage of the almost invisible scratches appearing on my car, and even a quick clip of my internet modem lights flickering erratically, though I knew that was harder to definitively pin on her. The entire presentation was designed to be damning, undeniable, and visually compelling. On the day of the barbecue, I arrived early, carrying a portable projector and a large screen, ostensibly for a slideshow of neighborhood memories. Karen, bustling around, directing people where to put their potluck dishes, barely gave me a glance. The air was filled with laughter, the smell of grilling food, and the happy barks of dogs. Sonny, wagging his tail, was enjoying the attention from the kids. It was a perfect summer day, a stark contrast to the storm I was about to unleash. As dusk began to settle, and most people had finished eating, I announced it was time for the Neighborhood Memories slideshow. Everyone gathered around, curious. Karen, standing near the front, gave a patronizing smile, clearly expecting pictures of neatly trimmed lawns and community events she had orchestrated. The first few slides were indeed harmless, photos of kids playing, the annual Halloween parade, a beautiful sunset over the community lake. People chuckled, reminisced. Then, the screen changed. A quiet murmuring began. The first memory was a time-stamped picture of Mrs. Henderson's perfect front yard, followed by one where her beloved gnome was clearly missing. Then, a voiceover, recorded by Mrs. Henderson herself, recounted her sadness over its disappearance. Next came a slide detailing Mr. Davidson's credit card troubles, followed by a voice recording of him expressing his confusion over the HOA survey. Each incident, small on its own, now built into a pattern of petty cruelty. The murmuring grew louder, people exchanging uneasy glances, many of them realizing they had experienced similar, unexplained, minor annoyances. Finally, the screen shifted to my security camera footage. The image was grainy at first, then sharpened, my front porch, the delivery truck, the package placed on my stoop. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Then, Karen's figure entered the frame, her distinctive scarf unmistakable. She bent down. She picked up the package. She walked away. The slow-motion replay of her taking my $300 package was irrefutable. Silence descended on the crowd, thick and heavy, broken only by the chirping of crickets. All eyes slowly turned from the screen to Karen, who stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. She tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The image on the screen, her own face caught in the act, was her undoing. The subsequent slides showed the subtle scratches on my car, the flickering internet modem. It was all there, laid bare. The accusations, once whispers, were now projected onto a large screen for all to see. A few brave voices broke the silence. "My mail went missing too," shouted Mr. Jenkins. "She always hated my purple flamingos," yelled another. The dam had broken. A wave of anger and resentment, long suppressed, surged through the crowd. Karen, pale and trembling, found herself surrounded by an entire neighborhood, no longer docile, no longer afraid. There was no escaping, no denying, no twisting this. Her reign of terror was over, exposed for all to see. The last thing I saw before the crowd fully engulfed her was the look on her face, not anger, not even fear, but a profound, overwhelming shame. The community had risen, not with violence, but with truth, and Karen, the HOA Karen, was finally facing her wild, public reckoning.